Hey, what's going on, champs? I'm Aaron Deliosa. Welcome to an Immigrant's Life podcast, my podcast about immigrants and immigration and everything in between. Thank you for listening and downloading the show, and thank you for supporting my dad.
Welcome back, Immigrant Nation. Another week, another new episode. I'm not gonna lie, it's been a few days, but I'm still riding high from a recent win for the 2022 Canadian Ethnic Media Association's Best Podcast. I've said it on my acceptance speech, but I will say it again. Thank you so much, Immigrant Nation. That award wouldn't mean anything if it wasn't for your total and undying support. So from the bottom of my heart, maraming salamat po. Thank you very much. You'll know how to reach me at An Immigrant's Life on all social media, and our email is at animmigrantslife@yahoo.com. That is if you want to come on the podcast, or if you know someone that wants to come on the podcast. That's the best way to get in touch with me, and let's talk. So that is that. Now, let's talk about the episode. Despite suffering from immense mental, emotional, and physical pain, our guest this week never gave up on achieving her dreams. In fact, she even used that pain to help others through their journey through pain. Let's get to it, shall we? Without further ado, let's get into the show. Isa, dalawa, tatlo. Today's guest is a therapist, an artist, and a trained killer. She'll hurt you with a head kick and then kill you with her sweet smile. Everyone, please welcome Taylor Murahashi.
Hello. Nice to be on here. Thank you so much for guesting me today.
Oh, definitely, man. I mean, when I saw you, I'm like, this chick is cool. I'm a doctor.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I appreciate that with my arbitrary Insta posting, but definitely it's gonna get a lot more fleshed out. I have a lot more kind of like content and things in the works. So thank you.
Amazing. Before we go anywhere, I want to say thank you for coming on the podcast. I really do appreciate it.
Of course. And it's also super nice to just be able to connect with more immigrant creatives and diverse creatives, because it's just been really refreshing getting to see how much that scene has been revitalized and like revalued, especially after 2020 when we're all locked in our houses.
Yeah, definitely. Well, it's part of it when I started that. I started like in the heat of the pandemic, but I always wanted to start a podcast. Like 5 years before that.
Yeah, I feel like the pandemic itself kind of like catalyzed me wanting to also start my own podcast, which we've been talking about. So everyone else stay tuned. He will also be featured on mine. And I also think like a lot of the creatives that I'm surrounded with, like photographers, even like things as like common now, quote unquote, as like crocheting and knitting, like it used to be so niche. And then you see everyone else who's just like, oh yeah, I can straight up, this is my yeast colony and I named it and I've categorized it and now I bake bread professionally. It's so beautiful. And just it's been so fun seeing it's like if we really had the time outside of the daily 9 to 5 capitalistic hellscape grind, what would we truly want to invest in? And choosing to want to invest in community and hear those stories and uphold those, what a beautiful thing to be able to be like, I now have the capacity for because I got to take a step back.
Yeah, that's a great question, by the way. What would you want to do out of 9 to 5? This is my out of 9 to 5, to be honest.
That's fair. I guess same. Lots of intersections though.
Yeah, plus, I go for bike rides, go for hikes, stuff like that, But I don't think I'll ever retire.
Just one of those people who's always like, I'm always gonna work. I feel like my mom or no, I'd have to say my family's kind of like the same way. They're like, oh, I'm gonna work and even after retirement, gotta always have that hustle or always have like that Filipina side hustle. Like all of my teachers be like slinging something, or they know someone, or they're doing something, or they're hosting some arbitrary class. And so I was like, oh, I don't know if I'd ever work that hard and hustle all the time, and then I like see myself doing that like right now, and I'm like, oh, okay, I'm the same.
Isn't it funny that we try to run away from our parents so much, and
Oh
then in
yeah.
the end, you know what? I am them.
Oh yeah, those quirks. So next level, totally caught me slipping. So I was like, oh man, I'm never gonna fall asleep with my hand in a chip bag. And like, bet I'm already falling asleep with my hand in a chip bag. And even just like down to those kind of like finer detail things, that's so true. And then like, putting on like the therapist hat on, it's like, yeah, that's also true. There's so many influences and generational things you don't really think about until you're so much like later on and you realize you're starting to follow those cycles and steps and you're like, ah, that's me.
That's funny. You mentioned that your mom's Filipina and the other half is.
White, from Idaho, rural Idaho. Yeah, straight up owns farm.
Hmm.
So I am biracial. So initially my family immigrated to America when they were fleeing the Marcos regime. Was not really a good spot for them at the time. My Lola, Josepha, which shout out to you, Lola. Thank you for helping me fulfill my wildest dreams and our ancestors' wildest dreams. So thank you for bringing us here. She married an American soldier,
Hmm.
and learned English because at the time they were, providing like English lessons in the Philippines, and that was also kind of around similar period with like her just realizing, wow, I don't really like this quality of life. We have to move.
Hmm.
Um, and so as a child, like that was all the context I knew. But as I was growing up, like the romanticism of her falling in love with an American soldier kind of started to fade away until like years after her death. It was really random. My mom was like, "Oh yeah, I forgot you inherited Lola's gun," and I was like, "What? Lola's gun?" And she's like, she'd shoot the guerrillas off the land," and I was like the like militant guerrillas, and she's like, yeah, it's Lola's pistol. I was like, what? And as I'm older now and I understand like the context of why my family had to leave, it's just really given me another like level of appreciation of holding two worlds as being a
Hmm.
first wave immigrant. Like my friends and I, we kind of have this thing of I'm as much half as I am whole. So like growing up in Portland, Oregon, right? Everyone nowadays are like, oh, social justice city, where Antifa is gonna like burn down the city and all that stuff. We're actually a Klan state. Like, not a lot of people talk. Everyone romanticizes Oregon and Portland, and they're like, oh my God, food cart city, which okay, our food carts do mediocrely slap. I give us that. Very accessible for food on the go. It's kind of dangerous with my wallet and job. I digress. um, but Portland was actually one of the last states to ratify the 14th Amendment. And even though they were for the abolition of slavery, it was actually to get rid of Black people from Oregon, to maintain a white Mecca. And so I didn't know any of this growing up, but I was one of 5 total Asians in the school that I was at, with under 10 people that weren't white, or
Hmm.
more specifically WASPs. So even though in the Filipino community, right, like I'm light skinned, I'm definitely not like I can even be passing sometimes depending, but if I'm like put in the middle of a rural white school, I'm ugly, I'm weird looking, my food's stinky, things like that, right? And so like I was just growing up with so many feelings of contradictions
Hmm.
until I felt like I really grew into myself. So yeah, it's kind of like the mix of both families.
Hmm.
And so most of my family, they immigrated to California after they spent some time in our place in Oregon, because we were the first of our family to immigrant here and kind of help the rest come through. So we were
Yeah.
the first house. My Lola was definitely the matriarch of coordinating all of that. And so I'd spend summers in California, like half the summer in California and the other half in rural Idaho. Um, and so I
That's
would
all.
from like these like rodeo, like I don't know, like state festival. I don't know how to describe it. State fair, yeah. Where there's like 12 people and thousands of like corn and the wildlife and just all that.
Pigs
And
and cows.
Oh, cows, sheeps, the beautiful little Avon tournaments for one. I'm so sorry for my anyone who's like you are butchering this. I am. I really am. And then I get plopped down in like San Fran or LA right after that. So,
Uh,
and then go back to Oregon. So it was kind of a little bit strange, like first like my summers growing up, but I really
mm.
did appreciate the exposure to all those dualities, you know?
Yeah, you see different sides, different perspectives.
Yeah, yeah. Like
What?
I can
Sorry,
really,
going back to your Lola.
oh
Where is
yeah.
your family from in the
Uh,
Philippines?
Panginasan. So
Pangasinan. Okay.
yeah, yeah. Which all of them, my like they all speak it, but since I was first wave actually, when my family initially came to Oregon, because their accents, even though they took the time to learn English and speak it, they were put in special ed classes,
Hmm.
because they were perceived as stupid because of their accent, and so, which is like hilarious now because I was like they were multilingual, and not only multilingual, like multilingual because like Tagalog's different than like
Mhm.
the dialects and all of that. My Lola actually spoke 7 languages.
Seven.
Uh, yes, seven whole entire languages, which is just amazing, right? And to come from that and then to be placed in something where it just wasn't even appropriate education and also taking resources from individuals that needed it, they decided not to teach me Tagalog actually.
Hmm.
So that's something that I'm actually currently learning, which has
Oh,
been a
that's
really
all.
fun way to like reclaim my culture and embrace it.
Okay. All right. I know that's one of my regrets too. I didn't learn another dialect
Mm,
because I'm a Tagalog, and Tagalog they have this aura of like we're the shit, we're the boss, right?
yeah,
Which is not true at all. because
at all.
because first of all, the Pangasinense they're the best cook. The Visayas are the great singers. We're just like we're good artists. That's what I'm gonna give the Tagalogs. But other than that, we don't really do anything else.
Gotta give him the artist thing. That's so funny that you mentioned that with like the lyrical stuff because I remember like growing up some like hearing like I don't know Western fairy tales like Cinderella when I'm just like why is this bitch be tripping and then I'll be hearing like these Filipino like folklore and stuff too of like Asawaga's gonna get you at night kind of things
Hmm.
and so I don't know why that kind of it reminded me of Bakanawa like how when like you know you bang the pots and pans into or sing into the night and like that's why they're so lyrical
Mhm.
and so my Lola was always like we sound like birds when we speak and that's why and I was like oh cool and so there was always like this mysticism behind like that specific dialect which it's hard to find access and education in Oregon too so I've been just mostly relying online stuff
Okay, that's fine.
yeah
That's the best way. Really, is just talking to someone. That's the best
yeah
way.
Yeah, immersion, honestly, because I actually speak decent Spanish.
Hmm.
Studied abroad a couple of times in Costa Rica and Oaxaca and southern Mexico. And so, like, learning Spanish and just actually going into the countries, I had never learned it better. I also had like teachers that were like, that was the hill they die on. They would not speak English that whole hour. And I was like, what a relief. You don't have to answer my stupid question. Maybe you are, but I don't know what you're saying. And so it like forced me to learn it. And so I'm excited for kind of having like a new career transition more into private practice, just
Hmm.
open up my capacity to reconnect with some more like philam centers and stuff around here. So also a nonprofit, like, or excuse me, grassroots, Gabriella is another one that I got on my radar that I'm excited to reach out to. So pumped to
Gabriela.
reconnect like that. Yeah.
That's an old one, Gabriela.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they definitely have a little sector in Portland. Because just even access to like Filipino groceries in Oregon is hard. Like
Really?
everyone's like, yeah, yeah. They're like, oh, go to Fubon, which is like kind of like that's like technically the largest Asian shopping center. But instead, I go to California and my family, they all like, you know, load me up with the big old bag to take back to the fam here. And then also other community members here. So
That's
yeah.
funny. Man. That's one thing. Like I'm really proud of our culture that we're very generous.
Super generous. Yeah. And also I didn't really realize how much my love language is entrenched in food. And, like if you step away from the fam and then you come back from the fam and then they have like the big old like feasts and stuff, or just like
Mm,
merienda time and like tea time and talking, and it's just like I miss being able to do that as accessibly in California than
mm,
like you can in Oregon. Yeah.
yeah. I love inviting other culture to our parties, you know?
So much fun. Yes, so much
It
fun.
blows their mind like there's so much food.
Yeah, and I was like, and you have to try every single one of them, or you're going to offend these people. And then you ain't coming back. And they're like, I'll eat everything. And they're like, oh, I can totally do this.
Yeah.
It kind of cracks me up because like since I have like a lot of friends that are fighters, they have like hella metabolism. Filipino food parties and fighters, that's like a firm handshake. They're like, oh, look how strong your friends are, and that they're always eating so much. And I was like, yeah, they are. So
That's funny, man. But the thing is, the reason why there's so much food is it's not really to consume there. It's
yeah.
actually you have to ballot it and bring it
Yeah, the
home.
little to go home things. Like I can pack food so good. I'll totally see that kicking in after like in college. I'd be like, having college parties like with friends or whatever. Everyone's totally like knocked the fuck out. And here I am like packing the food drunk, like making sure everyone has to go when they wake up the next morning. Which was actually kind of funny because I also had like some other friends that are like Southeast Asian where they kind of have like similar cultures and
Yeah,
stuff would also be standing up late at night with me doing those things at like 3 in the morning
that's
packing the
funny,
party
man.
food. Yeah.
I have this joke that like for other like I don't know like a white person or whatever, I'll be
Yeah.
like, yo, you cannot hang out with Filipinos. You're gonna be fat, and then they're gonna call you fat, and then they're gonna feed you more.
They are. And they're gonna make fun of you while feeding you too.
Exactly.
Yes. You have to like you have to come in. I always tell my like femme friends that have like purses or bags,
Mm.
bring the tiniest one possible because they will stuff it to the brim, and you just don't understand. I it was actually funny because I had uh an aunt on my dad's side, so like the white side that was also in California, and so
Mm.
like I like to like visit them all up in there, and she dropped me off at one of my tita's house and the other part of California, and I was like, okay, when you come in, so you bring the tiniest bag possible. You accept only some guavas, but not all the guavas. And she's like, okay. She accepted all the guavas and left with like a tote bag. And she's like, I don't know how I'm gonna eat these all. It's just me and my mom at home. That's like, it's fine.
They
Uh,
don't care. They're gonna feed
yeah.
you anyway, and then just gonna give you more food till you explode.
Exactly. But I really love that part of our culture because it's such a fun warmth to share with others.
Mm,
Being able to bring back all those like Filipino goodies that you definitely can or you kind of can get in like, Oregon, right?
mm,
Being able to share those with like the kids that I work with
mm,
was super exciting because back like when I was working with program, A Village for One, which shout out to A Village for One. I believe they have a fundraiser thing going on in December. So if anyone wants to check them out, they're actually only one of total two nonprofits in Oregon that
mm.
specifically serve sex traffic survivors.
Also, look, sorry for cutting you off. We missed this part. If you have anything to promote, say it now.
Oh, then I totally missed that. Sorry about that.
It's all good.
Yeah. I guess they have a little holiday giving tree is that little
Mm.
promo thing is that one. So yeah.
How about your art page, your Instagram? If anyone wants to reach out.
Yeah, I also have an art page, Dreaming of Nightmares, which is attached to my Instagram. The Perfect Hell, never changed my edgy middle school handle. It is what it is now. I also am currently fighting out of Equip Academy. So if y'all are wanting to check out a woman and black owned gym, phenomenal. We also are a little gym that serves kind of like more of like the local community to make martial arts more affordable to keep kids off the street and out of gangs. So we also have some pro fighters, Kiana Moyer, who's going to be fighting November 19th
Mm.
for another pro fight. So if y'all are interested in seeing some fights or accessible martial arts, I'd check out Equip Academy.
That's awesome. So you're a practitioner of BJJ and Taekwondo. Which one did you get into first?
Yeah. So I initially started doing Taekwondo when I was a little kid. Back when I was, let's see here, yeah, in preschool, and no, kindergarten, excuse me. I was actually getting beat up by bullies
Hmm.
because it was a white predominant school. And they were like, "Your face is so round and funny. Let's fix it." And they'd like rub it against the chain link fence and stuff. Yeah,
No.
and no one would believe me because they're just like this little, and it was like this like little blonde hair, blue-eyed boy who was the perfect guy. He was really connected with like the church that was like influential in that school at the time,
Mm.
and so he was like impervious, right? And so my parents, they gave me a choice. They're like, you can get into music like you want, or you can get into martial arts like you want. And I grew up on Bruce Lee, man. Like that was an easy decision. I didn't want my face smelling that gross chain link fence anymore. And I can always sing in the shower, right? So I chose martial arts. Yeah, and the closest thing that at the time that was accessible was Taekwondo.
Mhm.
And so I actually later on got my Cookie Kwan certified third degree black belt, is how
Congratulations.
much I committed into it. Yeah.
What did you like about it?
Um, who that's a loaded question. So what I really love about specifically Taekwondo as a martial arts is it has such a rich history. Like
Mhm.
taking the actual Dan test, you have to know Korean. You have to like read it and know the history and stuff of the martial arts. So I just really had a deep appreciation of how it existed, like not just as like a sport, but as an art form. But what made me fall in love with it ultimately was the commodification of it.
Mm.
So a lot of Taekwondo studios pretty much were like pay to play, and my studio ended up pretty much doing the same thing while like overly promoting guys. I was actually really wanting to go for the Junior Olympics at the time,
Mm.
but no one was really pushing it or competitive enough, and so I started kind of looking around at other martial arts studios until it was actually Lameka Scream Up that took me away from Taekwondo and got me into MMA.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. So what got me into is like, Kali and stuff like that
Arnis. We call it
was
arnis.
yeah, yeah.
Mm.
Was for your third degree black belt test, you have to specialize in a weapon. And I was like, well, I've always loved this. So, and this is also something my ancestors have always done. And my Lolo, he actually did that. And so I was like, okay, yeah, I've seen him with like pictures and stuff. Let's just do that. And so I went and I started training it because initially you just have to like do this like cute little form and perform it to show your mastery of the weapon.
Mm.
Um, but as I was going there, I was getting pushed so much, and I got to like see actual like people do real Tai Chi at that gym. Like I remember seeing this old guy. He had like this fan, and he was like doing these forms, and I was like actually watching him because I don't know. Have you seen those ones before with the big fan?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And he saw me watching it one day and he's just like, "Do you want to actually see what this is supposed to do?" And I was like, "Yes." And so because they also had like the little fake plastic knives to go with the
Mm-hmm.
with the collie
Mm-hmm.
at the time, that he had someone come at him with it and he disarmed him with the fan. And it was the sickest thing ever. And in that moment, I was like, okay, I love you, Taekwondo, but we're gonna break up after I get my third dog. and I moved forward from that. Yeah.
that's one thing that I didn't like about Taekwondo too. It was like you don't really use your hands.
Yeah, why would you just be like, I have four limbs here. Let's just take away and only use two. I will
Exactly.
admit, I got some nasty speed from Taekwondo. Uh, I can do those kicks where they consider them like fancy, like, I don't know, people call them tornado kicks, 360 roundhouse kicks, whatever your colloquialism is. Those are easy. Like they make you do that as like a kid, but then they're like,
Mm.
oh, look at them like that MMA match, which obviously is a lot more difficult than in a Taekwondo sparring match where you're like scoring for points.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas like I'm going for their face. So the intention totally different too.
I'm sure you went on a tournament.
Yeah, I've had like a few competitions before, like a little bit for Taekwondo, but I know at the time, the team just really wasn't that competitive.
Hmm.
So I didn't really get that itch out until I started BJJ. So
Hmm.
after I kind of like left, them, I ended up going into Team Quest, where I trained under Matt Leyland, who's actually the Olympic wrestling coach for the USA team. So yeah. So he's amazing, great place. They took me in kind of like as a teenager, so I'd say like maybe like 16-ish is when I started there. And that's where I met Luis Pedro, who ended up being my Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu coach.
Hmm.
And that's where I really got to get into competing for jiu-jitsu.
What did you like about BJJ?
Um, I think it had like a very similar structure to Taekwondo in the sense that there was that deep, rich cultural history that I just really loved about that. And
Hmm.
I don't know, there's just something that I can't quite put my finger on when I think about that. But I think actually what initially attracted me to it is because I sucked. Like horrible. You put me on the ground and I'm like, I may as well just die right here. Like a little beagle on my back. Like, and that's why I chose it.
Okay. So there's so much different martial arts. Which one do you think is the one that is effective in the streets?
MMA, because like if you think about like martial arts moderna now, right? Historically, we have so many martial arts legends that are documented but also lost, right?
Hmm.
But because of like globalization, travel, cross-cultural, we're starting to refine martial arts as an art form. And so I think those unities of being able to mix and match for your body type and your accessibility needs, that's truly the best martial arts. Because as much as like I have a mixed relationship with Taekwondo, right? I do give it odes to having quite the speed for my kicks. BJJ, I know a lot of people, they always like give it criticism. They're like, "Ah, oh, you pajama fighters," and I'm just like, one of my favorite disses, by the way. I don't even get mad when people say that. They're like, "When are you gonna fight someone who's walking around with a gi?" And I was like, "Bro, I'm in Oregon. Everyone wears a sweater and a jacket.
You
Like,
should say, "Come over here. I'll get rear naked, choke you. We'll see what happens."
fuck around and find out." Yeah. So I just kind of kept at jiu-jitsu until I realized I didn't suck as much. But
Hmm.
that's kind of like the joke of jiu-jitsu is you always suck. Like the day you think you don't is the day you just need to quit because then you stopped learning. And I love the endlessness of it,
Hmm.
because that journey is always going to be something I can take with me throughout my life. My body's needs as I age, that's going to change my style of martial arts
Hmm.
too. And that's what I love about the fluidity of not just jiu-jitsu, but MMA in general. All right.
Hmm.
Like I can, for Taekwondo, I have crappy little hands that actually took me out of the game
Hmm.
for 5 years.
What happened?
So kind of circling to when you were like, oh, have you competed? Yeah, I did compete with jiu-jitsu, won some medals, had all the fun with that as a teen. But for MMA, there actually wasn't that many 100, 115 pounders at the time.
Hmm.
And so I focused more so on college and academics, just because I was kind of forced to have some give in my life. And I developed a disability in both my hands and actually lost control of them for a bit.
What kind
So
is it?
it was just a lot of like kind of like different things and genetic things I didn't know like I kind of had. But apparently when you overwork, it can actually trigger those latent things and
Hmm.
cause them to come out, which is a horrifying thing the public doesn't really know. A lot of people in the mental health profession actually burn out of the field early because they are rendered disabled from overworking.
Wow.
Uh, yeah. Like I know colleagues that have autoimmune disorders because of it. Just because the expectation for kind of like the whole college arc is you have an unpaid internship,
Hmm.
which is not reasonable when you have a lot of mental health professionals coming from the communities that they want to inevitably serve. So lots of gatekeeping there that I overcame. But after I've within this year reclaimed autonomy and like strength back in my hands, which it went from me dropping like little coffee mugs to now I'm just like pulling weights and doing like workouts and stuff, like weighted
or dropping
workouts.
people.
Yeah, so grappling. And so that's what's been kind of unique coming back while working with a disability as a martial artist is honoring my accessibility needs. I like at this time, like my grip game for jiu-jitsu is not the same as it used to be. But no gi, I don't have to be gripping on a gi because there isn't a gi to grip. And so just that slight adaptability of style change is everything. And that's why it's hard to say what the best martial arts is, because it's like, what is the best martial arts for your body kind of thing. Yeah. Right. So pretty roundabout.
Do you like gi or no gi?
I always have a heart for gi, just because like that's what I've trained the longest, right? I think it puts me right back into that like childhood nostalgia. But I'm really in love with no gi because it's a whole world for me. And I'm surrounded by a bunch of phenomenal no gi grapplers, and so it's an exciting realm that's really really applicable to the MMA ring.
Beautiful.
So yeah, so by default, no gi because it's practical. Gi when I'm feeling really nostalgic.
Oh, just for the listener that doesn't know what a gi is, if you could explain.
Oh yeah, a gi for jiu-jitsu is kind of like those like little formal martial arts uniforms where they have a thick collar, and also there's like a bunch of different types of fabrics that they use and stuff. I'm not going to pretend like I know them really well.
It's pretty much is like karate uniform. That's what it is.
Totally. Like think of an OG kind of uniform that you'd see in like a stylized movie or something. Yeah.
Exactly. Have you knocked out someone with your tiny hands?
Yes, I have. I have definitely. I actually knocked a bully out with a throw. It was just a little shoulder. So there was these guys in this like in that rural school that I went to that just didn't believe I did martial arts, which was really funny because like martial arts for me has always been like this island outside of not really fitting in any of these communities I was surrounded in growing up, because I'm not really LA after I come straight from like a state fair in Idaho, and I'm not really Idaho because I'm too city from LA. It just like doesn't make any sense, right? And then I'm just strange in Oregon because also like when I say rural, there are totally different brands, right? Like so I didn't even fit in that regard. And martial arts was this beautiful little oasis for me where I was just myself, and so I never had to prove it because why would I have to be like, this is me? And it was never like a bragging thing. It was more of a catharsis, self-defense. And now as an adult, I realized reconnecting with sacred movement as a child. And so these bullies were kind of like, oh, I bet she doesn't. And so one of them had the bright idea to try to pick me up from behind.
No.
I didn't even know that they were going to do anything physical because I was like, why would you? I do martial arts. Why would you do this? Which, of course, at the time, no shit.
Why would you do this? I have to kill you now.
It was like, well, you fucked around, found out. So they picked me up. They tried to pick me up, but then like that really quick reflex just popped in, and I just did a really simple little shoulder throw, which was right into a curb, actually.
No.
So they kind of got a little knocked out for a second and then came to, and then they were like, you got to go to the principal's office now. And I was like, well, fuck. But my parents, they always were like, don't swing first, but if you have to swing back, you finish it.
So
and I did.
Filipino.
So Filipino. Because my Lola, even though she was like, very sweet, and she was the matriarch, she would put her foot down, right? My mom, take no shit. And so because if you do, they're going to just keep pushing you around.
That's why I tell my kids every day, I don't want you throwing any punches.
Yeah.
But if they throw a punch, you better make sure it counts.
Right, exactly. Make sure it counts, because I could have been excessive, right? But I didn't. I just had to throw them. That was all that really needed to happen. And they're like, oh, you're going to the principal's office now. At the time, he was actually really rad. So when he got the whole story, he's just like, so you jumped her and she defended herself.
Mm.
And he's like, when you put it that way, I was fine. I walked out there with grins. Bully was obviously like suspended for whatever. But yeah, so I have put bullies down before, or I don't know. I've also had like random kids just constantly tried to square up because I was always small and petite.
Mm.
So something about just the patriarchal ego cannot handle the fact that a petite woman may in fact take you down.
Mm.
And so sometimes like transfer kids that were like coming into the school would be like, oh, she's a martial artist, and they just wanted to like prove themselves to other kids.
Mm.
And then the kids that have been like in this rural high school with me, well, rural school for actually like grade school through part of high school, right?
Mm.
They're like, oh no, like please, you don't have to actually anymore after that one kid, right? And they fuck around and find out. And so, the last one that did it, he wanted to prove that his karate kick was superior. And I was like, I don't actually care. Good for you. I hope your kick's good. And then he tried to kick me, and so I head kicked him, which was the Children's Museum on a field trip. And so there's cameras there too. And so they had to get like the security involved. So as a child, I was just like shaking him around. It's like, oh my God, they're calling security on me now.
I love that you went up for a head kick. You could have kicked him leg or something.
Oh, okay, yeah, of course a head kick, because like you gotta commit, right?
You gotta commit. You gotta kill the guy.
Well, because I don't want to have to kick again. That's too much energy. Efficiency, my friend. Efficiency.
Well, with your amazing kick, I'm pretty sure if you hit him in the leg, I'm pretty sure he's not getting up for days.
Maybe I didn't want to hear it. I don't know. But it was a reflex, right? Like maybe I just didn't want to hear him gab afterward. But whatever was going on in my little child mind was, I don't want to do this again. And so I really committed to it at that time. And after that, no one did. That didn't stop, like, people wanting to like bug me and stuff like that and bully me, but they sure didn't physically bully me. And I put a stop to that. So
how about girls? Do they bully you?
Oh, they were more racist with their bullying than anything. It was always like, wow, are you a dude because you're so muscular? And like really weird things like that, which as a teenage girl, just as a feminine individual at the time, like being called a dude and muscular was like a horrible disc. I'm non-binary and feminine. So the irony in that, I don't care anymore. But now as an adult, I'm just like, fuck yeah, look at these muscles. I don't have to spend extra time getting games. Yeah, I saw this like vague video where it was just like, hey little birdie, you like this bread? And it was just like this Filipina like flexing. She's like, I fucking love this bread, and that's me. My ancestors blessed me with this bread.
Hells yeah, man. I love it. It's so funny that in culture in the West, it's like you said, patriarchal, and in the Philippines, it's almost balanced,
Yeah. Which that was also like such a culture shock to me, was navigating the contradictions within like Western expectations of Asian women. There's the hypersexualization. There's the expectations to be subservient and quiet and meek, which a panay is anything but.
No.
That is the last thing.
That's why I married the white chick.
Right? I was like, go down. What do you want me to do? I ain't gonna be making you pizza. Like, no. So that there was that, but then there was also when I did flip that switch, when I would set boundaries, maybe not appropriately, but as a child would, right? Where they're like, oh, now you're dragon lady, and then oh, you're ghetto, and then they would start throwing in more classes, more pathologizing, and still racist rhetoric within that. Yeah,
definitely. So you mentioned to me that you're a therapist for sex trafficking survivors.
Yes. Yeah.
How did you end up doing that?
Oh God. That's a whole character arc. So I actually didn't start college with therapy in mind necessarily. So I'm a survivor, and part of surviving, I was inspired. I wanted to be the hero that I didn't have at the time. And so I didn't know what that looked like. And at the time, when you're in America and you're like kind of exposed to certain cultures, you get a lot of romanticism of law enforcement and the cops. And so I thought I wanted to be like in Criminal Minds, FBI psychologist or whatever. And so with just like hoping someday I could arrest horrifying people like that and see what justice looked like. Now as an adult, I realize that there is so much more outside the police. That's a whole other thing. And so I ended up actually being a cadet sergeant. And I learned all about the police kind of going through like this internship while getting my associates and stuff. And as I was going through that, I realized that like this still doesn't feel right. Because of all the common things we talk about, like, seeing mental health calls, they're not adequately equipped to handle that. And most of Portland is like substance abuse and mental health calls, and they're not trained clinical professionals who are dealing with crisis. They're people with 2-year, 4-year degrees with a gun and just everyday people. And that's not going to truly serve the community. And as I was going through my journey, trying to figure out like what I wanted to do, I kept on hitting this isn't it, this isn't it, keep asking why. And so my why ultimately drove me not to settle anywhere. My career with law enforcement got to the point where I had an offer from the CIA. And I chose to be a therapist instead because that offer was going to pay for my grad school, which I went through at the time in 2020. I did advanced standing, so I got my master's in a year during the pandemic. 11 out of 10 would not recommend doing. It's horrible. I never want to do that again. And they would have paid for my college. But after having that whole experience with like law enforcement and seeing all of these deficits and ways that they're not equipped to serve the community, I didn't want that. And so I realized that after all of these years, I had carved out all of these niche capabilities and skills and potentials, and I had that answer within me. And so I chose my own path to be a therapist, to serve the community in the way that they needed and that I could.
You mentioned you're a survivor. Survivor of what?
Sexual assault and some moderate trafficking, which don't really want to get much detail into. Also, just out of honor of individuals that also might be listening to. It's not necessary. But I definitely totally like to pay ode to the fact that not one survivor story is the same and not one is different. And so I'm always mindful of the fact that while I have experiences, I will never be the perfect expert, whereas these survivors that trust me enough, and it's an honor to facilitate their journey. I'm just a facilitator. I don't know more about their lives than they do in their own brains. And so being able to have that relational model and understand the complexities and the dynamics and the shame that come with it is really helpful. And I think gives me an enriching practice, because you can't read that in a book. Like you have all these white academics being like, hashtag trauma-informed care, when communities of color have been healing trauma since war for 500 years of like occupation, right? Like that's what the Philippines have been doing. That's what Black communities have been doing. That's what Indigenous communities have been doing. And then you have these white academics in college telling you, I know better because trademark. And so there's also that layer within the mental health field too.
Yeah. I like what you said that I was listening to a podcast about this Korean woman, North Korean. She escaped and she's in America now and doing well. And she was asked that, why don't you go to a therapist? And she's like, therapist?
Yeah.
What you gonna say to me?
Yeah.
I'm from North Korea, guy.
like what do they have to offer? And then also another thing I challenge, I straight up, I will drag the DSM-5. My Yelp review of it is shit. That's what it is. Because when you're looking at the DSM-5, right, like how pathologizing and neurocentric and Western is it truly? And that's why I always caution communities of like, BIPOC people
Mm.
to have a culturally competent therapist that is of your community if possible. If possible,
Mm.
because the DSM-5 will, like, let's say a good example, pretend stereotypical psychopath, right? You have to have some criminology within your background where you violate mainstream law, even though
Mm.
mainstream law is generally based off of systemic oppression within America. And so if I were to pretend I have a mom who is unable to breastfeed and she steals like, formula. Is she a criminal? Fuck no, she's feeding her child. And so I refuse to base my practice off of the criminalization and that type of Western lens
Mm.
when working with individuals. But as I'm navigating this field, I'm realizing that white colleagues, just because they read a textbook, they don't actually know. And they do a
Yeah.
lot more damage than they should
Mm.
when practicing.
For sure. Do you work for an organization, or I think you mentioned that you're doing solo practice now?
Yeah, so I do work within a private practice, which just to minimize joke people and spamming for trying to RSVP with me, I'm not going to mention it right now. But I do work for a private practice, which I know a lot of people when we're talking about the nonprofit industrial complex are really like, oh, well, now you sold out for private health insurance and stuff. But that's actually where I get to have like my most fun. The people that I'm working with now actually kind of are very similar to me, where they're first wave individuals or fresh immigrants that have broken that generational trauma and poverty and systemic oppression, and they finally made it, quote unquote, within their field. And now that
Mm.
they're stable, they're like, and now what? And now they have these big questions of how can I heal myself after I've done these beautiful grand feats? My ancestors are proud, my living ancestors are proud, but I'm in so much pain right now. And so I have the privilege to be able to work with individuals like that while also being able to serve Medicaid, which are primarily the individuals I'm working with.
Mm. What's the difference between a therapist, a psychologist, and a social worker?
Yeah, yeah. So therapist is, I'd say, like a, a general label that a psychologist or a social worker can have. A
Mm.
counselor is separate, and I tend to see them more so with occupational therapy, which you can also do mental health therapy for that, which is interesting. And so for social work and psychology, I actually started my degree in psychology. I initially wanted to do neurosurgery, but that obviously did not where it panned out. But what caused me to choose social work over psychology was when I was working in the hospital.
Mm.
So there was this hospital psychiatrist, and he heard that I was like going to college for psychology, and he's like, "Why?" And I'm like, "Well, because I don't think a criminal justice degree is like actually going to do anything." And he's
Mm.
like, "Yes, but why psychology, not social work?" And I was like, "Well, why social work?" He's like, "Here, let me take you back to the psych board, and let's just take a poll of who would go back and do social work over psychology." And I was like, "Okay," didn't answer my question. So it brings me back into like these psych ward wings, and we're like talking to the different mental health providers, and we're like, "Oh yeah, social work all the way." And I was like, "But why?" And all of them were like, "Because you can move around the field, baby. You don't got to be pigeonholed." And I was like, "Pigeonholed?" And so basically, like, and also it's a lot less schooling, so you can get kind of more pigeonholed within psychology because of whatever modality and things that you choose, and it's more medically based.
Mm.
Or and so you're checking off like, oh, they met X, Y, and Z criteria, they're demonstrating these symptoms, therefore they have this. Whereas social work is more so, I recognize the systemic influences of the macro and meso and micro and how those all can create a person. So that's more so how I can inform my practice. So,
Mhm.
like a good example would be, let's say someone lashes out in anger, right? But it's more so defense mechanism based off of PTSD and generational trauma.
Mm.
Um, or maybe someone just generally has a different culture and that's just ways that they communicate and stuff like that.
Mhm.
And so I'm not going to diagnose them with a mental health illness when they're just not white. Like, so that's kind of the vague way I can kind of describe social work and psychology. I think what I really like about social work is I can choose different areas. So micro is like more on one-on-one like therapy. Macro is policy writing, which is like what I did in program design at the county level. So I did a little bit of that during 2020. That's actually my area of focus and expertise is continuing education for providers.
Mm.
And then there's the meso, which is more globalized type of work and solidarity. I mean, like Doctors Without Borders is a good example of like meso type of work, I guess I could say. Yeah.
Mm. How do you not bring your work from home?
Yes, and right. I think as I've been learning more about just how to apply, ironically, my own coping skills and techniques to myself. Because I was like, oh, you're a therapist. Do you use your things on yourself? And I was like, hell yeah, I do. But also, like, it does totally influence me, right? Like, I don't want to pretend like those stories that I carry and hold with me aren't seriously heavy.
Mm.
Like, I honor those. I let myself cry. I let myself be mad. I let myself be depressed even at times. Um, but it's also a matter of like how do you get out and how do you balance and strike that? And I think I have a really great balance with like my personal life, my hobbies, my loved ones, and a lot of really good support systems outside of it. Because there's no way that I would be able to serve the community in that way without also having that reciprocation of community support.
Definitely. If you cannot help if you're empty.
Yeah. Yeah. You can't pour from empty is one of my
Mm,
favorite lines.
exactly. What if you're gonna help a patient that barely speaks English? How can you help a person like that?
Yeah. For me, I haven't because of the type of practice that I was in. They were kiddos that are like, from the state and residential. I we have a lot of programs for like immigrants and refugees within Portland, like IRCO, that actually have specialties for that.
Mm,
So if there's a language barrier, I will refer out because unfortunately I don't believe that I could serve them to the best of my ability in the way that they deserve. Like they deserve that type of level of understanding because I can't catch those slight colloquialisms and changes in languages when I'm
mm,
treating it. So language barriers are very real in the therapy world. Yeah.
definitely. You also mentioned that you're a therapy for decolonizing popular practices. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I guess it's kind of like circling back to that DSM-5 thing where most of those mental health diagnoses and kind of the way that they create criteria is based off of studying white, middle class, upper class males. And so when we're looking at the way mental health kind of manifests within those realms, it's a really narrow lens. And so when I'm decolonizing popular practice, I'm moving away from the notion that the gatekeepers know everything. I refuse to acknowledge that upper academia is the only way when we have many community experts that don't need a degree to know things out here. A really easy, like, I guess, like, parallel I like to make is within the education system. So you can see like so Oregon has this new thing, kindergarten for all, because in the United States, so like we have grades, 1 through 12, which is the last for like high school or whatever, but kindergarten before that to prep them for those grades. Um, they noticed that, and also, excuse me, preschool before kindergarten, they noticed that Black boys were getting expelled from preschool. Yeah, yeah, exactly. And that is straight up entrenched in racism. It's just even that access to academia, it starts on a very basic level. And so then, like some colleagues in the county were like, well, we should have access for preschool, not just the options of private preschool or the small ones that people don't get waitlisted off, they get kicked out of. So they're making more access to education. And that is within my lifetime, right? And so there
Mm.
is absolutely no way that academics today have truly refined or only know one way. We have so many different types of spirituality and indigenous wisdoms lost. Like, very easy example, uh, burnings, right? We have horrible wildfires that burnt down like the gorge in Oregon, in California, things like that.
Mhm.
Whereas the indigenous folks would do controlled burnings to make sure that doesn't happen. And so now we have scientists that are like, whoa, did you know this? And it's like, well, no shit, Sherlock, we've known this, but you told us X, Y, and Z wasn't relevant. And so when I'm doing decolonizing practices, I'm not listening to the academic discourse. I'm listening to what are the community needs. What do
Mm.
they already know? What are they saying doesn't work? Right? Like a really good example is so many DV advocates are like, call the cops. You do not call the cops when you think the cops are going to arrest both parties
Mm.
because they're brown, or are going to get deported, or are going to have so many horribly negative consequences if they choose that. And so decolonizing popular practice to me is also not focusing only on systemic resources like DHS, the state, and the government, but more so to reinvest back into the community and center them rather than these monetary powers that are just choosing who is the deserving and undeserving of these services while maintaining power.
Mm. Do you have clients that are male?
Yeah, yeah. I have a I have quite a diversity of clients. I have a range of like cisgender clients, male, female, trans, non-binary. I really do have quite a range of clients.
And do you obviously approach them differently? Which one do you think are easier? Not easier, I guess. Like, yeah, so easier to communicate with, like the male or the female?
Um, I think it's just a matter of how to communicate, right? Because like communicating, like just taken away from like the gendered binary with an individual ultimately boils down to how relational are you? Are you recognizing them as the individual rather than all of these boxes that can create them into a stereotypical monolith?
Hmm.
Because some of the most insightful like conversations and facilitations and sessions that I've had are from people you would expect me not to get along with. And or on my day to day, I obviously they're clients, I want to be friends with them, but like individuals that have wildly different backgrounds, it's a matter of how how are you able to authentically connect with them and hear them as they are, rather than only focusing on these kind of stereotypes that make them them. I will admit, like it's easy because there's so much resources for cis het female sex traffic survivors than there are males, right? Like
Hmm.
that's just a blatant inequity, and even more so inequity that's not even being talked about, quite frankly, and most of the discourse of trafficking survivors are the trans and non-binary ones. Those are the core of my work because then you also have like gender dysphoria. How do you process that when you also have deep, complicated sexual trauma and how that's making you dysphoric with your body?
Hmm.
And so I think it's also like, how much does the participant want to engage? What's their capacity? What are they willing to? But because there's so many examples for females, there's so many online resources I can like point them to. Whereas like for males or trans, non-binary, just anyone else, it's very difficult.
Hmm. Have you had a patient that is violent towards you?
Yeah, in the past I have. That was more so back when I was working in residential programs. But when I'm looking at anger, I'm looking at anger as an expression of need, right? Like a good example is like, why is this kid so angry and always yelling at me? Well, maybe back at home outside of the classroom, right? Maybe the kid had to yell over several siblings to get their needs met. And anger to me is more so a process.
Listen, I'd like to talk to you all night, but I think we're there. Before we close out, do you have any parting message for the listeners?
Yeah, I guess for any of those survivors out there, you are powerful. You truly are. Um, I guess for survivors that are out there, no matter what, lack of supports, all the supports in the world, you are your own expert and your experiences are valid.
Wise word from a wise woman. Again, Taylor, thank you for coming on the podcast. I really, really appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me.
Definitely. Have a good evening.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you again, Taylor, for coming on the podcast. I really do appreciate it. Thank you, listeners, for listening. This is Aaron Deliosa for An Immigrant's Life. I'll see you guys later.